Here we go.
I'm Dan Lipinski.
I'm Bill Lipinski.
And I'm Ray Hanania, and this is Two Guys on Politics with our guest, former Congressman Dan Lipinski, who's joining us for a second week. Dan, last week's show, we got a lot of great responses. I think it's the power of the two Lipinskis that have really made it interesting to have the two of you and your experience in Congress, offering perspective on the national election. It attracted a lot of attention. We got a lot of views on that podcast. So what's today's topic?
That's great to hear. Well, before we start, I should have warned you. I have a Twitter poll right now. Yesterday was Halloween, and we were giving out a choice of Reese's peanut butter cups or Kit Kat. So I want to hear from each of you. Which would you choose if you had to choose one of those? So
I
Ray?
would choose neither one of them. I've never liked either one of those candies.
I would go with the Reese's peanut butter cups.
I thought that Reese's were. I thought the peanut butter cups were going to be the real hit, but I figured it had to have something without peanuts. But apparently, kids of trick-or-treating age prefer Kit Kat. So I can't
really.
I want to know why that is. I don't know. Is it most of my friends? I think most in my age group would probably go with Reese's peanut butter cup. I think so. I found that very interesting.
I think your poll was stolen from Reese's peanut butter cups. I don't think that the total votes were counted properly. And I think that we need to redo the election and take over. We're going to go to the Reese's peanut butter cup factory, and we're going to protest until they're reinstalled as the rightful heir.
Could we have Halloween again next week?
We could do that.
I think it's Elon Musk's fault now that he's running Twitter. I read the entire board, but I think this is a good lead-in. I go with the Reese's peanut butter cups, and as one of us chose none of the above, which wasn't a choice. We are a
country. I can say that if I want to.
He's a radical.
Yes, you're free to say that. There was no choice offered with that, so you could just sit it out. Well, that could lead us down a number of different roads, but I think the general topic we want to talk about today is why is the United States, why is our society, our politics so divided, and is there anything that can be done about it? So I think the first question is, how do you define, why do you say it's divided? I think all three of us would say yes, it's divided, but I think we have to first define, what does that mean to you? So who wants to go first?
Well, I'll go first. Here's what I think. Yeah, we've always been divided in this country over certain issues at certain times, but we've never had the hostility that we have now. Before, as one of you mentioned earlier, it was sort of like a baseball game or a football game. The two sides competed against one another. One side won, the other side lost. Side that lost said, okay, we'll try to get you the next time around. That's not the way it happens any longer. And now, as I say, it is, the animosity that exists between people. You listen to Fox News Network and their people after 7 o'clock at night. They're terrible, absolutely terrible. Now, the worst person I know in this battle is that woman, Rachel Maddow, I think her name is. I mean, I've heard her. She is worse than anybody on Fox News. But there are many very, very ugly, attacking people in the news media that is causing this great divide. Now, we can go back to when we had the fairness doctrine. The fairness doctrine said, if I was on a program and I attacked Ray Hanania, they had to give Ray Hanania an opportunity to come on that program and defend himself. We did away with the fairness doctrine. And I don't care who did away with it. It was a terrible, terrible thing. It opened the door for many of these vicious flamethrowers that we now have in the news media. And on top of it, about the same time, Newt Gingrich started his violent attacks on the Democratic Party and members of the Democratic Party. I think those two events is what really started us down this road to where it is now so difficult for people, whether they be left or right, Democrat, Republican, liberal, conservative, progressive, to come together. Because if you try to cross over and say that this individual who's a liberal has a good idea and you're a conservative, your own people will attack you. So that's where I see where we're at. Now, I hope one of you two fellas have an answer for that, because at the present time, unless God, hits me with another lightning bolt, I don't know what the answer is.
Well, is it the media? I mean, Ray, is it the media's fault, or the media politicians, are they just responding to what people are feeling? Is it the demand that people want to hear this kind of stuff, or the media forcing it on them, or what? How does that all come together? How does that work? It's a chicken and egg kind of problem, isn't it?
Well, no, actually, that's the very point I was going to make, that I do believe it's the change in the news media that changed the divide, how we looked at the divide. Because listen, 30 years ago, if a former president lost an election and said that election was stolen, it should be investigated, this is horrible, that person would have been a front page headline across the news media in every paper left and right, because it was a good story. A former president saying that an election was stolen, that's a huge story from the context of news. Today, the media now decides what stories are stories and what stories are not stories. They've become partisan. Most of the media, I think, is on the left. When you divide the TV, cable news, and the TV stations, you got Fox News on one side, as you pointed out, Bill. Sometimes they are terrible. But when you look at the right, I'm looking at CNN, CNBC, MSNBC, the entertainment shows, all those late night talk shows. They've all merged into one angry bludgeon that attacks anybody that questions what they believe is the truth. And if somebody says something that they don't agree with, you're anti-Semitic, you're racist, you hate Black people, you hate Asians. If you were to refer to the color of your skin as being white, you're suddenly a neo-Nazi, or you're QAnon, or I don't even know all these different groups. But right now, they label people, and they use those labels to undermine arguments rather than address the topic. Address the topic. Trump says the election was stolen. Let's debate it and talk about it. Instead, we don't talk about that. What we talk about is Trump is a bad person. Trump should go to jail. Anybody that believes in Trump is terrible. They're deplorable, to quote a famous former senator. So I think that's what the problem is. I think it's the media that has skewered our political system today.
Yeah, I want to just say before, Dan, you jump in here. I believe it is the news media. I believe the news media gives the platform to these radical political people to spew their lies, their misunderstandings, gives them the opportunity, to try to make their points with the American public. Dan?
Well, that's kind of different from what Ray said. Ray said that the media is shutting people up. You're saying that they're giving the wrong people, or too many people, or wrong people, too much of an opportunity to spew their left wing or right wing ideas.
Well, he's right.
How crazy they are.
He's right in a way, because what they're doing is they're saying this group is right, and you can say anything you want to say. Nancy Pelosi can stand up behind a president and rip up his speech in a protest, during a live broadcast of the State of the Union. If Joe Biden were to give that same speech today, and a Republican, heads up the House, which it looks like it might happen this coming year, And what if that Republican speaker ripped up that speech? What do you think they'd say about him? They'd condemn that person. So if they agree with you, they give you the platform. If they disagree with you, they silence you, they disparage you, they throw epithets and names at you and anything to discourage you, but they never address the facts or the issue. They only address the person. They talk about the person, not the issue that we should be talking about. And I think that's what the news media is doing.
Well, just because the liberals outnumber the conservatives on TV shows 4 or 5 to 1, if it doesn't mean that's the same thing exists on radio. There have been numerous surveys made on radio that 70% of the radio talk shows are conservative bent. And I've listened to a number of them. I listened to the liberal ones also. I believe that's true. The conservatives on radio far outnumber the liberals. Dan?
Well, look, human nature doesn't change, but it sounds like you two are saying, or maybe it's, well, I'll just say it for myself. There used to be limits on what people who were in politics or people who were in the news media, there was a sense of some kind of values that they were upholding that have sort of gone out the window now. There's a great quote that I heard, but I can't find it again, so I'm not really sure it's a accurate quote. Scott Adams, who writes the Dilbert comic strip, said that Donald Trump looked at politics and said, well, most politicians, 3 or 4 out of 10 times they say something, they're lying. I'm gonna lie 7 or 8 times out of 10. I'm just gonna up that a little bit, and I'm gonna be successful. And that's was Donald Trump's so-called genius in being able to be successful in politics, and that made sense to me. I mean, I see that. I think it worked for him. The news media, both those who support him and those who were against him, helped him to a great extent. The left-wing news media were more than happy to go after Trump, and all that did was raise his popularity amongst some Americans, which was very helpful to him. And they would, no matter how much they talk about, how awful Donald Trump is, and we got to get rid of him. The news media, look, the ratings went down on all those cable channels, evening shows when Donald Trump was gone, because they didn't have anything to talk about anymore. On either side. So yeah, I definitely think the news media is part of it. The news media has changed because we used to have 3 networks, and you had a half hour of news on each network every evening, and the whole media landscape changed tremendously. And now everyone's out to get the audience they can grab to make a buck. Now you got the internet. Now everyone has their own Substack or wherever that they're trying to get people to, give them, $5 a month, $10 a month, and hear my opinions. And no one, look, I had a lot of trouble when I was, in Congress, when I was trying to raise money. The left-wingers used to say, oh, we need to democratize political giving. We need to encourage small dollar donors. And who raised the most money in small dollar amounts? Donald Trump. The problem is if you're saying we need to come together, we need to work on these important problems, that you're not going to excite people to give you $5, $10, $25, $50 to run a campaign. And all of that comes together. The campaigns have changed. The news media have changed, and that helps to drive us apart. Now, is there any hope of coming together? Is there any way that any of this could change?
Well, it used to be in the news media that the principle was let somebody give them enough rope so that they can hang themselves. We didn't hang them. We allowed them to make themselves look whatever way bad, however they wanted to be. If we thought they were bad, we let them present themselves as bad. And then the public could look at that, and we had trust in the public to say that they would come to the right decision about, if you present all the facts fairly, they will, the majority, the vast majority will always come to the right conclusion. But we don't trust the public anymore to do that. And the media, for some reason, because of social media, where now the public, anybody is a, Walter Cronkite, they can go right off and podcast. We can do a podcast. We could go on Facebook. We could say whatever we want and have no knowledge or a lot of knowledge. It doesn't matter anymore. So the idea that if somebody is nuts, let them get out there and show that they're nuts. Why is it that the media feels that they suddenly now have a responsibility to say that person is nuts? I don't trust the media, and it's actually hurting what the media is trying to do, because I think that Trump lost the re-election because people were upset with the way he acted. But instead of getting a strong president to take his place, we now have a weak president. And I think Donald Trump is going to, if he's the candidate for the Republican Party, he's going to win. I don't see Biden beating Trump. And his popularity increases the more we martyr him. Jane Byrne did that in the 1983 election. She martyred Rich Daley. Rich Daley couldn't talk when he was running for state's attorney. I remember Rich Daley. He couldn't put his sentence together. He's a great person. I'm not judging him as a person, but if you needed a quote from him, it was very hard to get a good quote. But instead of focusing on the fact that he couldn't say things the way we thought it should be said, Jane Byrne attacked him so personally that we only focused on her attacks and nobody focused on what were his failings. That helped him become state's attorney and then eventually become mayor of Chicago. That's what's happening with Donald Trump. He's going to be there. And the last two things I want to say is, one, we should return the fairness doctrine. We should bring it back and impose it on the media. And two, we should put limits on how much money can be spent overall in any election at different levels, national, local elections, county elections, state elections. There should be a level limit on what can be spent.
The Supreme Court won't let us do that, though. The Supreme Court said money in politics is free speech. So it's free. You can't limit it. That's
you can't bring back the fairness doctrine if you have enough courageous people in Congress to vote in that direction. But the news media won't like that at all, because that's going to cut down the amount of money that they can make.
Isn't it funny that they say that? Isn't it funny that they say that that curtails free speech by limiting the amount of money, but it's okay to limit somebody's free speech because that's taking free speech too far? That, I'm not saying you don't make sense. I'm saying that ruling by the Supreme Court absolutely does not make sense in our world today.
And that was done by a liberal Supreme Court too. It wasn't a conservative Supreme Court that did that. I don't know what the answer is, but this country has to try to find some answer. We have China sitting out there. We have Russia sitting out there. Both of them are very antagonistic towards our country. At some time or another, they are liable to strike us. And we are going to have to be united in order to defend ourselves and to defeat either one or the other or both of those countries. That's the aspect of this that really concerns me, is how do we get united enough to repel any of these enemies that we have? And when you talk about allies, we talk about all these great allies that Biden put together in Europe. Well, other than the United Kingdom, I don't see anybody doing much of anything. And the United Kingdom hasn't been able to do much in several months because they can't seem to find a prime minister, which is another terrible situation. But so the European allies, I don't see them. Allies in the Pacific, South Korea, Japan, the Philippines. I question how sincere they are, because all three of those countries are somewhat tied up with the Chinese Communist government at the present time. So what I'm saying is we've got to find a solution in this country to get over our individual problems that we have so we can put together a united front. Let me just say, though, that the situation with Paul Pogosi, Nancy's husband, there have been so many different stories that have come out about this from the left, the right, the Democrats, the Republicans. I no longer have the faintest idea what the truth really is pertaining to what happened to Paul, okay? And that's terrible. It was a relatively simple incident. We should be able to get the facts and we should all believe what those facts are. But the way the news media has spun these stories, how could you do that? But I want to know if you fellas have any ideas on how you bring America together again. And let me tell you, there's before the Supreme Court right now, we have this affirmative action stuff. Now, I've been against this affirmative action for years. I voted against it in the 1960s when I was in the United States House of Representatives, because I believe that it punished some white Americans who had nothing to do with slavery, Jim Crow, or anything like that. But this case is being brought by Caucasians and Asians. I believe that it's going to win. Now, I don't know how soon the Supreme Court will end affirmative action, but I believe that this court is going to end it, maybe in a year, 2 years, 3 years. If we don't get ourselves somewhat united before that happens, that's going to be another monumental mountain that we're going to have to climb to try to get over to unite the American people.
I don't think that's going to be that. I don't think that one's going to be that big of an issue in the sense that the majority of Americans agree with getting rid of affirmative action. The polls show it. I think it's more of a it's going to be an issue for more an issue for the progressives screaming about it, but I think they're going to just marginalize themselves by doing that. But let's get to well, let me say one thing and throw out a question. One is, I think China may be something that we can come together on to oppose. That has always been, and there are people out there who say it's when America no longer had an enemy to come together to oppose. That's when we really started falling apart after the Cold War was over. And you go back historically, when America didn't have an enemy that we could rally together to defeat. That's, we need that. That's, some people have argued that. But how about, look, there's no easy answer here, but what if we changed something about the way we elect people to office? There's in the Wall Street Journal, Bill Galston has his column talking about a poll that was done by the Public Religion Research Institute and the Brookings Institution that says that 42% of Americans want a party that is, they'd vote for a candidate that was moderate in between the Democrat and Republican Party. At the beginning, I start out with the Kit Kat versus Reese's Peanut Butter Cup. Basically, we only have two choices right now, Democrat, Republican, and neither of them are as good as either Kit Kat or the Peanut Butter Cup. So is this a way, can we change our electoral system to make it easier for independents to run, or change our primary system where we're not having the Democrats choose the most crazy left winger, Republicans choosing the most crazy right winger, to be our final choices in the general election? Could that make a difference? If either of you think that could help to kind of bring the country together, because you elect people who are more committed to bringing people together, is that something Americans would support and rally around?
I think so. I think both of those would be good alternatives to the system we have at the present time. Now, how you implement that, though, I think is going to be extremely difficult. Ray, you had what I consider almost an ideal third party for president and vice president that you made mention to me about the other day. Two people who we consider to be moderates. Some people might not consider them to be moderates, but we do, and I think the majority of Americans would. Who were those two candidates, Ray?
Well, we were talking about we should have this requires courage, because right now you got the left and the right, and they're pretty much locked up and nobody's in the middle. We need somebody from the left and somebody from the right, a Democrat and the Republican, to step in the middle. And I think those two people could be Ron DeSantis and Manchin. I think if Manchin and DeSantis were to get together and say that we're tired of what's happening in this country, we want people to come together, that there's a moderate voice, that there's compromise on both sides, that we're tired of these extremists on both sides, the far right and the far left dominating our debate, calling people names. Let's talk about, let's get away from name calling and get back to issues, discussion. But we don't have two people like that. And I think they'd be great candidates, but we haven't seen anybody from the right and the left step into the middle and together say, we need to change what's happening in this country because we're going downhill. But can I add one thing about Paul Pelosi? Because I think this is so important, because it reminds me when Harold Washington was killed. I covered City Hall at the time, when Harold Washington died. I covered City Hall when he died. It was Thanksgiving. And people said at that time that he was poisoned. And who were the two people that told me that? And I wrote a story. I interviewed two of his bodyguards, and they said Harold Washington was poisoned by the opposition, that they killed him. And nobody said those people are nuts. The African-American community rallied around that belief. Even if today you'll still hear people say that Harold Washington was killed, that he didn't just die of bad eating habits or a heart attack. So what I'm saying is, it eventually was proven that it wasn't, that he died of a heart attack. But we never allow the process today to come to a resolution, because we like it when somebody says something we don't like, because we can use that as a weapon against them instead of allowing it to be resolved and then move on to bigger, more important issues. But, the Manchin and DeSantis thing, I think if two people like that were to come to the center, I think they could bring the country together. And I think a lot of people are tired of this animosity that we see, but I don't believe the news media will allow it, because in today's world, it's hard enough to sell newspapers with social media. And without that animosity, it's even harder to sell papers. Happiness is not a good news story.
Well, I think the two alternatives that Dan came up with are very good alternatives, but I think it would be easier to find two individuals, such as the two you mentioned, to run for president and vice president and establish a third party in this country with those two people at the top of it. I think that would be much easier to do under our system of government at the present time than it would be to either one of the two alternatives Dan had come up with. Although, I could accept any one of these three positions. We have to do something to find the middle ground for the people in this country.
Well, I think I hate to say it, because I don't like the fact that presidents have gotten so much power and we look to presidents to do everything. So I hate to say the best shot we have, I agree, is if we get a president, maybe a president, vice president ticket that is going to say, hey, we've got to come together. There are people, one from each party. They have a moderate run as a moderates, but whatever that's going to mean. But somehow show some leadership. I thought Donald Trump, I got in trouble for this, for saying it, but I thought Donald Trump, when he was elected, he might, because he talked about some things that Democrats like. The only issue he talked about on election night in 2016 was doing an infrastructure bill. That's the only issue that he talked about. I thought that he might actually think, hey, I'm not beholden to the traditional Republicans. I used to be a Democrat. Who knows what Donald Trump believes, if anything, but that he would see it in his own personal interest that, hey, if I take some things from the Democratic Party and I work with them on those, and these are things American public likes, I could be really popular. But instead, he decided, which I think Joe Biden I thought Joe Biden might be someone who can bring us together, but both of them, for whatever reason, decided, hey, the way I'm going to win re-election, I gotta please the base, and I've got to fight the other side. It's all about, and I heard this the other day, someone saying, look, you have Gavin Newsom, the governor of California. He's easily going to win his race. He's going to states to help Democrats who are running. Same, DeSantis went to New York to help the Republican candidate. So Newsom, DeSantis are not going to say, hey, my party's candidate is for, it's not trying to pick up the middle, it's to try to raise turnout on their side. And that just seems to be what's going on here. So let me throw out one other idea is, and the Australian system requires everybody to vote. Would you be supportive of that?
How do they require everyone to vote?
You get fined if you don't vote.
No, I'd be opposed to that. No, that's un-American.
You don't have to vote for anyone. You can go in and, just whatever you do.
I oppose that.
I was going to say, I like the opposite. I like the idea that those people that vote can get some kind of benefit or a tax reduction, even if it's a small or minor, credit on their taxes. Great. There are a lot of young people, they talk about bringing young people out to vote, and we can't really seem to get them to vote. They talk about, oh, look at how much they've registered. But it still comes down to, I think the seniors are the biggest vote in this country. And they're the ones who realize how important voting is, I think. But give people a benefit and maybe they will vote. But isn't that buying a vote then?
I disagree with that too. Of course, I was raised in the 1940s, in the 1950s. And, you wouldn't even think about something like that back in those days. In those days were really the golden days of this republic. No, I cannot accept either one of those two. I will bring up the third party with the two candidates, one from the Democrats, one from the Republicans. We need a new party, because if you're the president candidate of one party, you play to that base. Same thing the other way. We need a new party. Some people that change it, and there's nothing in the Constitution that says we can't have 3 parties, 4 parties, 5 parties. In fact, most of the founding fathers were opposed to any party in this country. They thought it was detrimental, and it is detrimental. It took about 200 years to catch up with it, but it's caught up with us.
Ray, were you gonna jump in there?
No, I was just going to say that the idea of rewarding people to vote is, in a way, it's kind of un-American, because it means that the whole value of our democracy and freedom comes down to our ability to express our views and to vote. And expressing our views has already been compromised. And, voting, I think is just jumbled right now. So having to pay people to vote, to reward them, I think that's the better way to do it. But I think if people don't feel that it's important enough to vote, then don't vote. But then stop complaining too.
He called that machine politics, paying people to vote.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's true. You're right. I mean, if you paid somebody, you could get in trouble for that, right?
Absolutely.
Well, I hear that there is. I wouldn't say it's a majority view, but I hear that there are young people today, and I've heard this from some college professors, that like the idea of going back to the machine politics that worked that in some ways that worked better than what we've got today. It got things done. I had a professor, I was down at Wofford College a few weeks ago, and I had a professor who was saying he makes that argument to his students. He said, this is the way the system works now. This is the way we work with machine politics. You know, the things at least got done with the machine politics. Isn't that wouldn't you prefer that? So we could go a long way on that one, but that might be a topic for a for another show about how things have changed. And does that make politics better? I mean, all the reformers came in and said, "Oh, it's gonna be better. We get rid of the machine." Is it really better? Are we all better off because of that? So
when you had machine politics, you also had political bosses who were interested in seeing to it that candidates that could win, were nominated, not candidates that were, wild, loose cannons. They wanted to win. That was their job. So they selected individuals who they believed that could win. We still had primary elections, but as long as the organization was behind the person that the bosses picked, that person won. On this program, the only one that ever participated in machine politics is yours truly. So I don't think it would be right for me to pontificate upon that. Dan is too young to really remember that. Ray, you were around at that time, but you were a member of the establishment that tried to destroy machine politics, unfortunately.
Here you go, Ray. You got what you wanted.
It was a great story. It was a great story, but you're right. We love the headline. We love the controversy. Good doesn't get headlines, bad does. And yeah, you're right, Dan. I think that the media in general today has gotten what they want. They wanted to destroy the system that they saw, and I think they've done that. And now they're left with this mess of extremism and from both sides, and it makes a far better headline than two people getting together in the middle. I wonder how the media would write about Manchin or DeSantis if they came together and said, instead of calling it a third party, they'd say, we're going to call this a Republican and Democratic Party. And I think the media would tear them to shreds instead of looking at them and saying, wow, two people who want to be moderates to bring the country together. I don't think the media would allow them to be the good people that they intended to be.
What is going to happen to the news media in this country at some point is that one of the two parties is going to get a death grip on government, on the federal level, in the House and in the presidency, and they are going to censor the news media to their own particular way. And the news media will have deserved it when that happens.
Well, I wasn't able, I haven't looked at it yet, but there's something that just came out in recent days about plans that I think DHS had to essentially censor or fight against disinformation. So I don't want to comment on it because I haven't looked at it. I've just seen some headlines about it. There's a few months ago, there are stories about how there are plans for this DHS, Department of Homeland Security, to fight misinformation, and the Biden administration, after a lot of pushback, killed that. But I think there was, I think what just came out is a report of what the plan was. So that's again another topic, but that fits right along with what you're saying.
That's so upsetting to me that that the government would want to identify disinformation because, one, it's so subjective, and instead of identifying disinformation, it'll become a process of identifying unpopular information, unpopular ideas. And out the window goes free speech. So in other words, people don't have free speech. Let's just be honest, in this country, people don't have free speech. Even though the Constitution says we have free speech, we're being told, you know what? And I know you're not saying this, Dan, but the idea of defining things as disinformation or truth is just another way to say free speech has its limits, and we're going to limit it so it makes us look good and makes them, the disinformation people, bad. And that really, that it's just sad to see this country go that route, because it was our freedom to say whatever we wanted, to stand up in front of the White House and be able to call the president a name or do whatever we want and be subject to criticism, but we still, nobody would arrest us. You know, nobody would, censor us, strip us from Twitter, say, oh, you can't be on Twitter anymore. You can't be on Facebook. You can't be on social media. Next thing you know, they'll say, hey, Ray, you can't have a podcast. So there's no end to this. I think that's the dangerous route that we're headed toward. And I do think that I can't believe there aren't two great people who believe in the principle of free speech and our Constitution to step out of this battle into the center and say, we need to change this and do something about it. I'm just shocked that we don't have two people like that, in office that want to do that.
Well,
see, I told you this was going to go on for, we've
Yes,
gone for a long time on this.
It has. Any final thoughts? Let's go around the table. Dan, any final thoughts? And then Bill, and then we'll. So Dan, any final thoughts on this?
Before we end, I want to make sure that questions I threw out there did not mean an endorsement of anything that I threw out there as ideas. Although we do, I do endorse opening the system up to independent parties and getting rid of these ridiculous primaries the way that they're run.
Yeah.
But look, something's got to change. We can't keep going forward like this. Our country, we cannot take for granted our country is forever going to be the country, a country to begin with. But the first thing that I'm most concerned about is our republic going. It already doesn't really work the way it was intended, in the way it's the framers of the Constitution intended it to work. And it's up to all of us to fight to make this work. But there's no easy solutions, and then it's always going to back and forth between look, people who would argue against the two of you and probably me would say, well, look, you want to go back to a time where things were different. There were things that couldn't be talked about back then, and they need to be talked about now the way that they are. It's just really not an easy situation. The world is much more complicated now than it was back then, and you can't put to use a terrible cliche, can't put the genie back in the bottle. So we gotta figure out what we can do moving forward. But there are no easy answers. I
know we've been terribly negative on this podcast about the United States of America.
No, I don't think so, but go ahead.
Oh, you don't? Okay. I hope you listen to this program. I still believe that there is a way out of this. I don't know what the answer is right now, but I believe that we could get out of this muck and mire that we are in to once again be a united people. That's my conclusion.
Yeah, and I would just like to see two leaders, one from the Republican side, one from the Democratic side, stand up, walk to the center, and admit what's happening today is bad. We need to do something about it. I thought Joe Biden was going to help bring that, bring us to that point. But clearly in his last speech to the nation, he did just the opposite. And that's very disappointing. And I'm worried we're going to be doing this for another 4 to 6 more years. And that's kind of scary, I think, for us, because the rest of the world, as Bill and Dan, you guys pointed out, they're looking at us. And if they see us weak and divided, that's their signal to grab whatever they can, do whatever they want to do, things that they never would have done if they were worried about us stopping them. Anyway, I'm Ray Hanania.
I'm Bill Lipinski.
And I'm Dan Lipinski, and this is still the greatest nation in the history of the world.
And we will see you guys next week.
It's still God's country.
And we'll see everybody next week on Two Guys on Politics with our guest again this week, Dan Lipinski. Dan, thanks for joining us. It's a real pleasure to have you on the program again.
Thanks
and
for having me.
And we'll talk to you, everybody, later. Thank you.